Hey there, this is Fritz Westover, your viticulturist here at Virtual Viticulture Academy, and also your host on the Vineyard Underground podcast. And I'm answering a question from a grower like you from the field today. It is from Maryland, and I'm going to dig right into it here. Okay, so the question is about Pierce's disease in Maryland and some other issues in the vineyard. The grower goes to state, a local specialist recommended that we get our vines tested for Pierce's disease in our Vidal Blanc and our Vinifera Blanc. We just got our results back, which state that those vines are positive for Pierce's disease. Our Vidal is also infected with leaf roll, and our Vinifera is infected with leaf roll and red blotch associated viruses. And the question is, how should we proceed with managing these vines when it's not financially feasible to pull them all out right now? Okay, so first thing I want to say is, grower in Maryland, you may not have to pull out all of your vines. So that's the first thing. If your vines have been positively identified with Pierce's disease, that is a bacterial disease that infects the xylem tissue, your water translocating tissue, and it is highly contagious, if you will. It's easily spread by multiple vectors that do reside in the state of Maryland, as well as the surrounding states of Virginia. And here in the Southeast, where we see it rampant in vineyards in Texas, and Louisiana and Alabama, for example. So when you find Pierce's disease in the vineyard and you have at least 3 of the 4 symptoms visually, that would be leaf scorch, that would be uneven hardening of the periderm in the fall. When your canes are hardening, you'll get green patches, or what we call green islands, rather than having uniform hardening. And then there could be a leaf drop and the petioles remain attached to the cane, and we call that a matchstick petiole. There are some things that can also cause these symptoms, but when you have all 3 together and you've sent that sample into a lab and the lab has positively identified the bacterium, then you know it's time to pull the vine out. Now, if you don't have time to pull the vines out this fall, you could at least go up to your infected vines that show the strong symptoms that you know have Pierce's disease, and you can take your lopper out or a chainsaw and just cut them right to the middle of the trunk. And the reason this is an effective method to start with is once you've cut your trunk, you've cut off the circulation from the vascular tissue to the top of the vine. And that is where the insects that are spreading the disease, your glassy wing sharpshooters, your blue-green sharpshooters, others that have been identified in your state of Maryland, those are going to be feeding on the canopy even after harvest. So if you can stop the flow of sap, you can stop the feeding on that vine and nothing can spread from it. But that's just the first part. You cut it there, and then you've got to go back maybe in the wintertime when you have more time, and you can pull those vines out and get as much of the root system out as possible. We don't know that Pierce's disease will spread from old roots in the soil, and there's very low chance of that happening, if it could even happen at all. So don't worry about getting 100% of the roots out, but in general, anytime we remove a vine, and especially if we're planning on replanting, we want to get as much of the root system out as possible. So that being said, mark all the vines now in the fall while you're able to see the symptoms before the first leaf drop. And then get out there and cut them now in the fastest, easiest method possible, maybe a chainsaw, maybe a lopper. And then go back and remove them in the wintertime when you have good soil moisture and you're able to get in there and do the extra groundwork that requires the removal of the vine. Now, as far as your red blotch associated virus and your leaf roll, those are also diseases that can spread in the vineyard. However, you can live with a little bit of that in the vineyard if your vines are older, which I know you mentioned your vines are older. That can be a problem with the nursery stock having virus in it when it arrived in your vineyard. We now have better certification programs that can help prevent that virus from being introduced into your vineyard. Many years ago, red blotch associated virus, there was not even a test for it. So it probably got into your vineyard from nursery stock that was unable to test at the nursery level for that virus. So at this point, you could remove some of the symptomatic vines that are no longer productive. Those might be some of the worst, but you can live with a little leaf roll virus and a little bit of red blotch. It's not ideal because there are also vectors that can spread that disease in your vineyard, especially mealybugs. So if mealybugs are present in the vineyard, you've got to control those as well. And that goes to say for every one of these problems we've mentioned so far, if glassy wing sharpshooter and other xylem feeding insects are a problem and they are in your vineyard and they are potentially spreading Pierce's disease, you also want to think of ways to treat for those vectors. Same goes for mealybugs. There are products you can apply to control mealybugs. So diligent scouting and using yellow sticky cards and traps to find those Pierce's disease vectors are going to be an important part of your program moving forward. So to summarize, anything that's infected with Pierce's disease and is positively identified, you do want to remove all of those vines from the vineyard, because once they're in the vineyard, you can very quickly and easily see spread of that disease from flying insects that feed on the xylem tissue. However, on the virus side, things tend to move a little bit slower, and the chances are that your vines came with some infection many, many, many years ago from the nursery stock. So they're most likely all infected, if not just many of them, or certain blocks. So you could try to, as long as the blocks are economically viable, you can try to keep managing those while also managing the spread and preventing the spread of the virus. But for Pierce's disease, those vines need to come out. So I hope these tips were helpful for you. And if any grower out there has a question, you can go to the Vineyard Underground podcast. That website is vineyardundergroundpodcast.com. Click on the Ask Fritz button, and you can send your question to me. I'll answer it here, or you can get invited to a live vineyard advising session with Virtual Viticulture Academy, and I'd be happy to have you there with the group and answer your question live there as well. I hope everything's going well in the vineyard, and I want you to be a better grower. Thanks for checking in.